Thank you very much, Emmanuel and Lino, and also to Eric. I'm going to spend a bit of my time, or most of my time, I think, we're focusing on a specific tool on financial resilience that we co-developed with the University of Essex. But before I did that, I thought I would reflect a little bit about some of the other tools and the general approach that CIPFA takes in terms of working with practitioners across both central and local government to better understand effective management of public finances. And we do this really through a combination of things. CIPFA sort of has standards and guidance that we provide to the sector to make sure that public finance professionals are adhering to good practice. But we also have a portfolio of tools and models that we provide sometimes on a commercial basis, but in other cases as a free-to-air product, where we really try to work hand in hand with practitioners to understand their needs and to reflect those needs as we develop a product. So not just saying, okay, this is what we think is good for you. We've developed it, now here, use it and give us some feedback. We sort of really make sure we turn that on its head and get feedback from the initial design stages of tools. And so a couple of examples before I get into the main show that I have today is we look at value. I know this webinar is to discuss financial or local accountability. And we think part of that accountability is making sure that taxpayer money is being used effectively and efficiently. And that comes through this value for money framework that we are very much supportive of. And we have two types of toolkits that we've developed. One is a project-specific one or before I go to the project-specific one, we have a benchmarking tool where across all of the local authorities in England, we showcase how councils are delivering specific services, how much they're spending, and what the outcomes are relative to their nearest socioeconomic comparator group. And this benchmarking exercise is an example of not sort of league tables or rankings, which we don't find particularly helpful, and which local authorities generally are a bit reluctant to participate in. But we use it as a means of allowing places to learn and identify other places that are doing better so that there's a community of shared learning. So if you are in town X and your comparative group is A, B, and C, and you happen to be at the top of that benchmarking exercise, then you may be in a position to help showcase what your best practice is. Alternatively, if you're falling at the bottom of these performance indicators, it gives an opportunity to reach out to other colleagues in different geographic areas to understand how they are delivering certain services, maybe at lower cost or at a higher cost, but similarly with higher performance outcomes. Another lens at looking at value for money, and again, mapping back to accountability, is on a project-specific basis where we've co-developed a toolkit with the University of Oxford that allows practitioners within local authorities to put their estimates of cost and revenue through a Excel-based spreadsheet and work through whether or not a specific project or program in the first instance delivers good value based on the 4Es framework, which is central to the UK National Audit Office's approach of value for money. So that's one example of local accountability. And another example is a financial resilience um, index that we've had for the past 10 years or so. And that is a quantitative approach where we look at financial indicators, mainly things like reserves, gross external debt, interest payable as a share of net revenue expenditure. And these are some of the things that we heard earlier today in the presentation, where they're very quantitative measures that you can't really argue with. And we present these in a benchmarking exercise, similarly using the CIPFA nearest neighbor model, which provides comparator groups based on a basket of about 40 or so socioeconomic indicators. And so that takes me to what I want to focus the next 10 minutes or so discussing, which is a qualitative version of a tool that helps practitioners in local government better understand their financial resilience and to do it in a way that complements existing quantitative measures. And so I will share my screen now. And all right. So I'll just spend 10 minutes kind of working through this. It's a new toolkit that we launched a few weeks ago at a practitioner workshop in Essex. And while I'm presenting this information, colleagues at the University of Essex, Lino, and Professor Ileana Stecolini have really sort of helped sort of develop the essence of the concepts and theory behind looking at perceptions-based understandings of how organizations develop resilience from a financial perspective. And so this is very much something that I'm presenting, but it is a joint effort. And it's a great example of how academia can work very closely and productively with practitioners through professional bodies such as CIPFA. And so this is, I think, a great cartoon that sort of captures the essence of how local government, or any organization really, during times of reduced resource and heightened sort of expectations, feel. Here you have Alice sort of panting to the Red Queen that, good God, we're running twice as fast, but yet we don't seem to be really moving anywhere. And her response is, well, if we weren't running twice as fast, we wouldn't even be looking at the same thing. And I think in the UK, this is particularly relevant because councils really have, they have some, 1,200 statutory requirements imposed upon them by central government. But 2/3 of the average council budget in the UK is dedicated to the delivery of adult and children's social care. And so it leaves very little for basically everything else. And that not only challenges overall organizational financial resilience, but it also makes it it comes back to this point about local accountability, about asking organizations to do or fulfill specific responsibilities as the spending envelope has shrunk considerably over the past 13 years or so. And so the conceptual framework is really, if you kind of, in this environment of less, how do places bounce back? That's sort of the the foundation of what resilience is, the ability to bounce back, like on a trampoline. And the two concepts that the toolkit embraces is that of bouncing back to basically neutral, or also bouncing forward to a better place. And we see this, and we see this sort of in the broadsheets of UK news media, where a number of councils have issued effective insolvency because they just simply aren't able to um, balance their books by reducing existing services, deferring or reducing investment, increasing fees and charges for the services they produce. And it goes to the extreme where then they're having to do fire sale liquidation of assets that they hold, which isn't particularly prudent for the medium to long term when you're having fire sale assets of things during a situation where you don't fully understand what the financial situation is, but all you know is that things are bad and that you sort of need to fill the hole and fill the hole quickly. What the toolkit tries to um, elucidate is strategies are ways to bounce forward. So you're not just trying to fill the hole so that it's flat, but that over time, councils are able to develop capacities to strengthen themselves for the medium to longer term so that they can actually change the way in which they deliver public services. They can change the priorities of traditional activities. They can change their internal structures to become more responsive to an ever-evolving fiscal landscape, and that they can actually extend or establish new or different service provisions rather than just looking at the status quo. So the toolkit itself, while it is qualitative in nature, it then translates the perceptions that users of the toolkit input through a Google form survey questionnaire into something that looks fairly scary and quantitative in nature, but it's really not. It's just a spider diagram that visually showcases where relative strengths and weaknesses lie across these four dimensions. But three of them, the coping capacities, perceived vulnerabilities, and anticipatory capacities, are really what I think make this toolkit quite unique. And so in terms of sort of the vulnerabilities, these are things like social demographic vulnerabilities, aging population, low education, decreasing population. But there's also some social economic vulnerabilities like income deprivation and population poverty, alongside more traditional economic measures such as, the job market or the investment climate for businesses and other organizations. Um, I don't have so much time, so I'm just going to touch quickly on what some of the anticipatory capacities might look like. And these are things that through the toolkit and going through the questionnaire, it's really trying to identify how organizations can work better at information sharing, monitoring, assessment of the vulnerabilities I just alluded to, and just really developing the critical thinking through things like scenario analysis, having central scenarios and kind of having low and upper bound of what might happen to both the revenue and expenditure, not just over the coming year, but also through their medium-term financial plans. There are these coping capacities, which form the third sort of leg of this type of toolkit. And these are just sort of the more traditional resources and abilities that allow shocks to be faced and vulnerabilities to be managed. And these are I think sort of the bread and butter of how many organizations across the local government sector in the UK and overseas sort of have to grapple with. They're used to sort of the traditional coping strategies. What we're trying to identify and develop is these anticipatory capacities. And so this is just very quickly how sort of that flow of capacities can really differentiate the outcomes of bouncing back to neutral versus bouncing forward to a place of strength. And this is just a quick summary. We'll circulate the slides, but this just really shows how there needs to be a broader awareness of not just financial dimensions, but the importance of non-financial ones as well. And that's why this toolkit is quite unique, because it's geared not only to finance professionals, but to pretty much anyone within a local authority. And through the workshop, that practitioner workshop we had a couple of weeks ago, this messaging came out quite clear that even finance directors feel that there's an important voice of non-finance professionals towards identifying good financial resilience. And so the toolkit itself, there's an authentication process where we sort of try to make sure that only legitimate members of an organization or council are able to fill out the form, so to kind of weed out some of the riffraff that might happen. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the questions that are asked through this type of qualitative assessment, perceptions-based survey. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there's approximately 80 or so questions that form the basis of the survey. And then there's an internal and external report. And again, it tries to create visual dimensions of where strengths and weaknesses lie to allow an organization to quickly identify where it might want to focus its resources on. And again, this is relative in the sense that it's within an existing spending envelope or resource constraint. And our goal is that with sufficient respondents to this type of tool, we can develop enhanced benchmarking. And it's really critical that we sort of get many organizations involved so that we can then provide these types of rag tables that show sort of comparisons across places, and hopefully, again, using that CIPFA nearest neighbor model approach. And then to finish off, there's an internal report that provides reflections to an organization specific to them. And this is just a QR code. If you're interested in learning more about the project and the toolkit, please scan that code and feel free to contact me or anyone on the team, and we'll be very happy to engage with you. So with that, thank you very much.